The dust swirled across the dirt road like a restless ghost as Harriet Lawson clutched her 6-month-old son to her chest, the unforgiving Oklahoma sun beating down upon them both. It was 1878, and Tulsa was nothing more than a small trading post with big ambitions, much like the woman who now trudged toward its wooden storefronts with determination etched into her face and desperation hidden in her heart. Her boots kicked up small clouds with each step as she approached the general store, the last $5 she possessed tucked safely in her pocket. Benjamin, her son, whimpered softly against her shoulder, his tiny fist clutching at her worn calico dress. She whispered soothing words into his ear, though her own stomach twisted with hunger and worry. "Just a little further, sweet boy," she murmured, pushing a strand of chestnut hair from her face. "Mama is going to find us something to eat and a place to rest." The journey from Kansas had taken everything from her strength, her pride, and nearly her hope. But not her resolve. Never that. She had promised herself that her son would have a better life than the one she had fled, even if it meant starting over with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a fading photograph of better days. The general store's wooden porch creaked beneath her weight as she stepped up, adjusting Benjamin on her hip. She paused, taking a deep breath before pushing the door open. The bell above jingled, announcing her arrival to the handful of patrons inside. "Afternoon, madam," the shopkeeper nodded, his gaze lingering a moment too long on her travel-worn appearance. "What can I help you with today?" Harriet squared her shoulders. "I need milk for my son, some flour, and whatever vegetables you might have that I can afford with this." She placed 3 of her $5 on the counter, keeping the rest hidden. A woman alone had to be cautious. As the shopkeeper gathered her items, the door opened again, the bell's cheerful ring contrasting with the imposing figure that ducked to enter. Conversation stilled as the tall man removed his hat, revealing sun-bleached hair and a face weathered by years under the open sky. "Mr. Fletcher," the shopkeeper acknowledged with a nod. "Your order came in yesterday." Noah Fletcher nodded, his blue eyes scanning the store before landing on Harriet and the child in her arms. He tipped his head in greeting but said nothing as he moved to the counter, standing a respectful distance from her. "Just passing through." The shopkeeper asked Harriet as he wrapped her purchases in brown paper. "No," she replied firmly. "I'm looking to stay. Would you know of any work available for a woman who can cook, clean, and sew? I learn quick with anything else." The shopkeeper's expression grew uncomfortable. "Not much call for that sort of help right now, madam. Folks around here tend to look after their own needs." Benjamin began to fuss, his tiny face scrunching up as he let out a hungry cry. Harriet bounced him gently, feeling the weight of stares around her. "There's work at the Silver Dollar," a woman near the dry goods suggested, her tone a mixture of helpfulness and judgment. "They're always looking for girls who can serve drinks and entertain." Harriet's cheeks flushed. "I'm looking for respectable work, madam. I have my son to consider." Noah Fletcher, who had been quietly collecting his supplies, cleared his throat. "Mrs. Perkins at the boarding house lost her kitchen help last week. She might be in need." Harriet turned to the cowboy, really looking at him for the first time. He stood tall, his shoulders broad beneath a faded blue shirt, with a gun belt strapped low on his hips. Despite his rugged appearance, there was a gentleness in his eyes that made her straighten her spine rather than shrink away. "Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. I'll inquire there." He nodded, paid for his supplies, and left without another word, the door swinging closed behind him. An hour later, Harriet stood on the porch of the boarding house, Benjamin asleep against her shoulder after a small meal from the supplies she'd purchased. The modest 2-story building looked clean and well kept, with curtains in the windows and a small garden to one side. She knocked, and moments later, a plump woman with gray-streaked hair answered the door. "Mrs. Perkins?" Harriet asked. "Yes." The woman replied, her gaze softening as it fell upon the sleeping child. "I heard you might be in need of kitchen help. I'm Harriet Lawson. I'm new to Tulsa, but I'm a hard worker and a good cook." She spoke quickly, afraid that hesitation might cost her this opportunity. "Mrs. Perkins studied her for a long moment. "You have experience?" "Yes, madam. I worked in my father's hotel in Kansas City before." She trailed off, unwilling to divulge too much of her past to a stranger, before coming here. "And the child's father, Mrs. Perkins asked, her tone careful but direct. Harriet's throat tightened. This was the question she'd been dreading, the one that had gotten doors slammed in her face before. She considered lying, creating a tale of widowhood that might earn her sympathy rather than scorn. But she was tired of lies, tired of the weight they added to her already heavy burden. "He's not with us anymore," she said simply, offering no further explanation. Mrs. Perkins seemed to consider this, then nodded. "I can offer you room and board plus $3 a week. You'll help with breakfast and supper for the boarders, laundry on Mondays, and general cleaning throughout the week. Sundays are half days." She hesitated, looking at Benjamin. "The child can stay in your room, but you'll need to see he doesn't disturb the boarders." Relief flooded through Harriet. "Thank you, Mrs. Perkins. We won't be any trouble. You can start tomorrow morning, 5 o'clock sharp." She held the door open wider. "Come in, I'll show you your room." The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a rocking chair by the window. Mrs. Perkins brought up a wooden crate lined with blankets that would serve as a bed for Benjamin. "It's not much," the older woman said, "but it's better than some alternatives for a woman alone." Harriet placed her sleeping son in the makeshift crib. "It's perfect, Mrs. Perkins. Thank you." After the woman left, Harriet sat on the edge of the bed, letting the reality of her situation wash over her. She had a roof over their heads, work that would feed them both, and for the first time in months, a glimmer of hope for their future. She unpacked their meager belongings, placing her husband's photograph face down in the drawer of the washstand. Thomas Lawson's handsome face and charming smile had once been her whole world. Now they were just painful reminders of broken promises and abandoned dreams. The following weeks fell into a rhythm that, while exhausting, gave Harriet purpose. She rose before dawn to help prepare breakfast for the boarders, mostly railroad workers, a few cowboys, and the occasional traveling salesman. Benjamin would sleep in his crate beside the kitchen stove, wrapped in blankets even in the summer heat, as Oklahoma nights could turn surprisingly cool. Mrs. Perkins proved to be fair, if strict, and seemed to grow fond of Benjamin, often holding him while Harriet kneaded bread dough or stirred great pots of stew. The boarders were mostly respectful, though a few tried their luck with the pretty young cook. Harriet deflected their advances with a polite firmness that eventually earned her a reputation as respectable, despite her circumstances. It was nearly a month after her arrival in Tulsa that Noah Fletcher appeared at the boarding house door one evening, his hat in his hands, asking if there might be a room available. "Just for a few weeks," he explained to Mrs. Perkins as Harriet listened from the kitchen doorway, Benjamin on her hip. "My place north of town needs some repairs before winter, and I'd rather stay here than camp while I'm in town for supplies." Mrs. Perkins nodded. "I have one room left, Mr. Fletcher. You can have it for $1.50 a week, meals included." The cowboy's gaze drifted to Harriet, and he offered a small nod of recognition. "Thank you, madam. That'll do fine." That evening, as Harriet served supper, She noticed Noah sitting quietly at the end of the long table, speaking only when spoken to. Unlike some of the other men who boarded there, he didn't leer or make crude jokes. He ate efficiently, thanked her for the meal, and retired to his room without lingering. This pattern continued for several days, with Noah leaving early each morning and returning just in time for the evening meal. He was unfailingly polite, but maintained his distance, something Harriet both appreciated and found herself oddly disappointed by. It wasn't until the following Sunday, her half-day off, that Harriet encountered Noah outside the structured environment of the boarding house. She had taken Benjamin to the small church on the outskirts of town, determined to maintain some semblance of normalcy in their disrupted lives. After the service, she was struggling to manage her fussy son and the small basket of mending she'd brought along when Noah appeared beside her. "Allow me, Mrs. Lawson," he said quietly, taking the basket from her hands. "Thank you, Mr. Fletcher," she replied, surprised to see him at church. Somehow she hadn't pictured the quiet cowboy as a religious man. "I didn't expect to see you here." He fell into step beside her as they walked back toward town. "My mother would have my hide if I missed Sunday service, even with her gone these past 10 years. A small smile softened his weathered features. "Old habits." Benjamin reached out toward Noah, curious about the stranger. Harriet adjusted her hold on her son. "He's usually shy with men," she explained. "Children are good judges of character," Noah replied, offering a calloused finger to the baby who grasped it with delight. "Aren't you, little man?" Something warm unfurled in Harriet's chest at the gentle interaction, but she quickly tamped it down. She had learned the hard way that a handsome face and gentle manner could hide a selfish heart. "Have you settled in well?" Noah asked as they continued walking. "Yes," Harriet nodded. "Mrs. Perkins has been kind and the work is honest. And the father of your boy?" The question was asked carefully, without judgment. Harriet stiffened. "That's not a subject I discuss, Mr. Fletcher." Noah nodded, respecting her boundary. "Fair enough. We all have parts of our past we'd rather leave there." They walked in silence for a moment before he spoke again. "I'm headed to my homestead tomorrow to start those repairs. Won't be back for a few days." Harriet wasn't sure why he was telling her this or why she felt a small pang of disappointment. "I wish you safe travels then." "Thank you." He handed her basket back as they reached the boarding house steps. "You have a good day, Mrs. Lawson." "And you, Mr. Fletcher." That night, as Harriet rocked Benjamin to sleep, she found herself thinking about Noah Fletcher. There was something steady about him, a quiet strength that reminded her of her father rather than her husband. Thomas had been all flash and charm, sweeping her off her feet with grand promises and dazzling dreams. Noah seemed like a man who measured his words carefully and meant what he said. But she had been wrong about men before, catastrophically so. The price of that mistake was sleeping in her arms, fatherless and bearing a name that his own father had discarded along with them. True to his word, Noah was gone the next morning. The boarding house seemed oddly quieter without his presence, though he had contributed little to its daily noise. Mrs. Perkins mentioned that he'd paid for his room for the entire week, even though he wouldn't be using it. "That man has always been honest to a fault," the older woman remarked as they prepared breakfast. "Known him since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. His father was one of the first settlers here, had a spread north of town. Good people." Harriet absorbed this information silently, filing it away with the other small details she'd gathered about Noah Fletcher. The days passed, filled with work and the care of her growing son. Benjamin was becoming more active, beginning to crawl and explore his surroundings with an enthusiasm that kept Harriet constantly on alert. The boarding house residents doted on him, bringing him small treats and toys carved from wood scraps. Friday evening brought a summer thunderstorm that rattled the windows of the boarding house. Most of the boarders had gathered in the parlor after supper, playing cards or reading by lamplight as rain lashed against the glass. Harriet had just put Benjamin down for the night and was helping Mrs. Perkins clear the kitchen when the front door burst open. Noah Fletcher stood in the doorway, drenched to the skin, his hat doing little to protect him from the downpour. Water pooled at his feet as he removed his hat, nodding apologetically to Mrs. Perkins. "Didn't mean to bring the weather in with me," he said, his voice rough with fatigue. "Goodness, Mr. Fletcher, you look half drowned," Mrs. Perkins exclaimed. "Harriet, fetch some towels while I put on some coffee." Harriet hurried to comply, returning with several towels which she handed to Noah. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, and she noted that his were icy cold despite the summer heat. "You rode through this?" she asked, unable to keep the concern from her voice. Noah nodded, running a towel over his face and hair. "Didn't expect it to hit so hard or so fast. Was halfway back when it started." He accepted the mug of coffee Mrs. Perkins pressed into his hands. "Thank you, madam. You go on up and change into dry clothes before you catch your death, Mrs. Perkins instructed. "Harriet can bring you up a plate of supper once you're settled." Noah nodded, his blue eyes meeting Harriet's briefly before he headed up the stairs, leaving wet footprints in his wake. 15 minutes later, Harriet knocked softly on Noah's door, a tray of food in her hands. He opened it promptly, now dressed in dry clothes, his hair still damp but combed back from his face. "Mrs. Perkins insisted," she said, holding out the tray. "Said you'd need something hot after your ride." "She's right about that," Noah replied, taking the tray. "Thank you." Harriet started to turn away, but he spoke again. "How's your boy?" The question surprised her. Most men showed little interest in children, especially those not their own. "He's well. Growing faster than I can keep up with some days." Noah nodded, a small smile crossing his features. "Children do that. My sister's boys seem to sprout like weeds." "You have family nearby?" Harriet asked, curious despite her determination to maintain distance. "Not anymore. Sister moved to California with her husband a few years back." Something crossed his face, a shadow of old pain. "It's just me now." "I'm sorry," Harriet said softly, understanding the weight of aloneness all too well. Noah shrugged. "It's the way of things sometimes." He hesitated, then added, "If you need anything while I'm here, Mrs. Lawson, you only have to ask." The simple offer, made without expectation or agenda, caught Harriet off guard. "Thank you, Mr. Fletcher, that's kind of you to say." "Not kindness, just decent." He nodded once more. "Good night, Mrs. Lawson." "Good night, Mr. Fletcher." As July turned to August, the heat intensified, making the work in the kitchen nearly unbearable. Harriet would often step out onto the back porch in the evenings, Benjamin in her arms, to catch whatever breeze might stir the heavy air. It was during one of these respites that Noah found her, returning from the stables where he kept his horse during his stays in town. He paused at the bottom of the steps, looking up at her with a question in his eyes. "May I join you?" he asked. Harriet nodded, shifting Benjamin to her other hip. The baby had grown comfortable with Noah's presence over the weeks, often reaching for him when he entered a room. Noah settled on the step below hers, removing his hat and setting it aside. "How are you holding up in this heat?" "As well as can be expected," Harriet replied, fanning herself with her free hand. "The kitchen's like a furnace by midday." I remember my mother saying the same. She'd send us children to the creek on the worst days, said she couldn't abide our complaining while she was trying to cook. Harriet smiled at the image. "Were you a difficult child, Mr. Fletcher?" "No more than most boys, I expect," he chuckled. "Always dirty, always hungry, always in some kind of trouble." "And now?" she asked, surprising herself with the boldness of the question. Noah looked up at her, his eyes reflecting the fading light. "Still get dirty, still get hungry. Try to stay out of trouble these days, though." Benjamin chose that moment to babble excitedly, reaching toward Noah with pudgy hands. Without thinking, Harriet transferred her son to the cowboy's lap. Noah accepted the child with practiced ease, settling him comfortably against his chest. "Hello there, young man," he said softly. "You've gotten heavier since last I held you." Harriet watched them together, a strange ache forming in her chest. This was what Benjamin should have had: a father who spoke to him gently, who held him securely, who noticed when he grew and changed. "He likes you," she observed. "The feeling's mutual," Noah replied, allowing Benjamin to grasp his finger. "He's a fine boy, you should be proud." "I am," Harriet said, her voice catching slightly. "Every day." They sat in companionable silence as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Benjamin eventually dozed off against Noah's chest, his small body going slack with sleep. "I should take him up," Harriet said, reaching for her son. Noah carefully transferred the sleeping child back to her arms, his hand lingering for just a moment on her shoulder. "If you need anything, I know," Harriet interrupted gently. "Thank you, Mr. Fletcher." As she carried Benjamin upstairs to their room, Harriet acknowledged to herself that something had shifted between them. In Noah Fletcher's quiet presence, she had found a rare moment of peace, a respite from the constant vigilance her situation demanded. But peace was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not yet. Not when she was still building a foundation for herself and her son. The next morning brought news that spread through the boarding house like wildfire. A band of outlaws had robbed the bank in a neighboring town and were believed to be headed toward Tulsa. The sheriff had called for men to join a posse, and several of the boarders, including Noah, had volunteered. Harriet learned of this when Mrs. Perkins mentioned it at breakfast, her voice tight with worry. "Those Wilson brothers are dangerous men," the older woman said, shaking her head. "I pray our men don't catch up to them." A cold dread settled in Harriet's stomach. She had seen enough violence in her life to know its cost. The thought of Noah riding into danger made her hands tremble as she served the remaining boarders. Later that morning, as she was hanging laundry in the yard, she spotted Noah saddling his horse behind the stables. Without thinking, she set down her basket and crossed the yard to him. "Mr. Fletcher," she called, her voice steadier than she felt. Noah turned, surprise evident on his face. "Mrs. Lawson." "I heard you're joining the posse," she said, stopping a few feet from him. He nodded, tightening the cinch on his saddle. "Sheriff asked for help. Couldn't rightly refuse." Harriet clasped her hands together to stop their trembling. "These men, they're dangerous." "They are," Noah confirmed, his expression grave. "But we'll be careful. Sheriff Tanner knows what he's doing." "Still," Harriet pressed, "it seems a risk to take for a bank that isn't even in our town." Noah's gaze softened as he looked at her. "Today it's their bank, tomorrow it could be ours. Or worse, someone's home or family." He adjusted his gun belt, checking that it sat properly. "Some risks are worth taking, Mrs. Lawson." She wanted to argue, to point out that he had no obligation to risk his life for strangers, but she held her tongue. This quiet, steady man had his own code, his own sense of duty. It was part of what made him different from Thomas, who had never considered anyone's needs but his own. "Please be careful," she said finally, the words barely above a whisper. Noah's expression changed, something warm flickering in his eyes. "I will," he promised. "I've got reason to come back safe." Before Harriet could process what he meant by that, he swung up onto his horse and tipped his hat to her. "Look after that boy of yours. I'll see you both soon." She watched him ride away, joining the group of men gathering near the sheriff's office. Only when they had disappeared from view did she return to her laundry, her movements mechanical as her mind remained with the departing posse. The day stretched endlessly, each hour marked by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the boarding house parlor. Harriet went about her duties with distracted efficiency, checking the street each time she passed a window. Benjamin seemed to sense her unease, fussing more than usual and refusing to nap. It wasn't until after supper, as she was washing the last of the dishes, that the sound of horses drew her to the front porch. The posse was returning, their faces grim in the gathering dusk. Harriet scanned their number anxiously, her heart stuttering when she couldn't immediately locate Noah among them. Then she saw him, riding at the rear, his shirt darkened with what could only be blood. Forgetting propriety, Harriet rushed down the steps, reaching him just as he dismounted. "You're hurt," she gasped, noting the makeshift bandage wrapped around his left arm. "It's nothing serious," Noah assured her, though the tightness around his eyes belied his words. "Bullet grazed me, that's all." "Come inside," Harriet insisted, taking the reins of his horse. "I'll have one of the boys see to your horse. You need that wound cleaned properly." For once, Noah didn't argue. He followed her into the boarding house, where Mrs. Perkins immediately took charge, sending for hot water and clean bandages. "You men and your foolishness," the older woman muttered as she directed Noah to a chair in the kitchen. "Always thinking you're invincible." "Never thought that, Mrs. Perkins," Noah replied with a weak smile. "Just doing what needed doing." Harriet placed Benjamin in his crate by the stove, then helped Mrs. Perkins gather supplies. When the older woman was called away to deal with another returning boarder who needed attention, Harriet took over, carefully cutting away the bloodied bandage from Noah's arm. "This will hurt," she warned as she prepared to clean the wound. Noah nodded, his jaw set. "Not my first bullet wound, Mrs. Lawson." Despite his stoicism, he flinched when she began cleaning the jagged furrow that ran along the outside of his upper arm. Harriet worked carefully, her touch as gentle as she could make it while still being thorough. "What happened?" she asked, partly to distract him from the pain and partly because she needed to know. Noah took a deep breath. "We caught up to them near the river. They didn't want to surrender. There was shooting." He paused as Harriet applied a stinging antiseptic to the wound. "One of them got behind us. Would have shot the sheriff in the back if I hadn't seen him. So you stepped in front of a bullet for Sheriff Tanner." Harriet couldn't keep the mixture of admiration and exasperation from her voice. "Not intentionally," Noah replied with a slight grimace. "Just moved to warn him and caught the edge of it myself. And the outlaws, 2 dead. 1 wounded and captured. He'll stand trial." Harriet nodded, beginning to wrap clean bandages around his arm. "And you could have been killed," she said quietly, her fingers trembling slightly against his skin. Noah's good hand came up to cover hers, stilling their movement. "But I wasn't," he said softly. "I'm right here." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the kitchen around them seemed to disappear. Harriet was acutely aware of his hand on hers, warm and strong despite his injury. She saw something in his gaze that both thrilled and terrified her, a promise, unspoken but unmistakable. Benjamin's sudden cry broke the spell. Harriet pulled her hand away, finishing the bandage quickly and efficiently. "You should rest," she said, not meeting Noah's eyes. "The wound isn't deep, but you've lost blood." Noah stood, swaying slightly before steadying himself against the table. "Thank you for your care, Mrs. Lawson." "Harriet," she said impulsively. "After all this, I think you might call me Harriet." A slow smile spread across his face, warming his tired eyes. "Harriet," he repeated, as if testing the feel of her name on his tongue. "Then I'm Noah to you." She nodded, gathering Benjamin from his crate. "Good night, Noah. Rest well." "Good night, Harriet," he replied, and the way he said her name made her cheeks flush with warmth that had nothing to do with the kitchen's heat. The following days brought a subtle shift in their interactions. There was an ease between them that hadn't existed before, a sense of shared understanding that transcended words. Noah's wound healed cleanly under Harriet's careful attention, and by the end of the week, he was using his arm normally again, though she noticed he favored it when he thought no one was watching. It was during this time that Harriet began to acknowledge what she had been denying to herself. She was falling for Noah Fletcher. The realization came not in a dramatic moment, but in the quiet accumulation of small kindnesses. The way he always carried the heavy laundry basket for her without being asked. How he carved a tiny wooden horse for Benjamin that the baby clutched tightly in his sleep. The respect with which he treated her, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. One evening in late August, as summer's heat began to relent, Mrs. Perkins approached Harriet as she was preparing vegetables for the next day's soup. "The Harvest Festival is coming up next weekend," the older woman mentioned casually. "It's quite the event in Tulsa. Everyone attends." Harriet nodded, continuing her work. "It sounds lovely. There's dancing," Mrs. Perkins continued, "and games for the children, though your Benjamin is still too small for those." "I'm not much for dancing these days," Harriet replied, thinking of the last time she had danced with Thomas at her parents' anniversary celebration, just weeks before he had abandoned her and their unborn child. Mrs. Perkins gave her a knowing look. "Mr. Fletcher asked if you might be attending," she said, her tone deliberately casual. Seemed quite interested in the answer. Harriet's hand stilled over the carrots she was chopping. "Did he? Mrs. Perkins hummed affirmatively. "Fine man, Noah Fletcher. Not one to trifle with a woman's feelings." "I know that," Harriet said softly. "Do you?" The older woman's voice sharpened slightly. "Because from where I stand, you've been keeping that man at arm's length despite your obvious feelings for him." Harriet looked up, startled by Mrs. Perkins' directness. "It's complicated," she said after a moment. "Life always is, child." Mrs. Perkins sighed, her expression softening. "But sometimes we make it more complicated than it needs to be. Noah Fletcher isn't the man who hurt you, Harriet. And punishing him for another's sins won't heal what's broken inside you." The words struck Harriet like a physical blow, all the more painful for their truth. She had been holding Noah at a distance, afraid to trust, afraid to hope. "I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "None of us ever feel ready for the things that matter most," Mrs. Perkins replied, patting Harriet's hand. "But ready or not, life moves forward. The only question is whether we move with it or let it leave us behind." With that, the older woman left Harriet to her thoughts, which remained in turmoil through the evening and into the night. As she rocked Benjamin to sleep, she found herself studying her son's features, seeking traces of Thomas in the curve of his cheek, the shape of his eyes. But increasingly, she found herself thinking not of the man who had left them, but of the one who had steadfastly remained. The day of the Harvest Festival dawned clear and cool, with just enough crispness in the air to hint at the approaching autumn. The boarding house was abuzz with activity as residents prepared for the day's festivities. Harriet had risen early to help with breakfast, dressed in her second-best dress, a blue calico that brought out the gold flecks in her hazel eyes. She had decided to attend the festival, though she still wavered on whether to accept if Noah asked her to dance. Some part of her felt disloyal to her son, as though opening her heart to another man somehow diminished the wrong that had been done to Benjamin. Yet another part of her, growing stronger by the day, whispered that perhaps the best justice she could offer her son was a future filled with love rather than bitterness. Noah was absent from breakfast, having left early to help with the festival preparations. Mrs. Perkins informed Harriet that all boarders were expected to attend, so after the morning chores were complete, Harriet dressed Benjamin in his best gown and wrapped him snugly against the cool air. The town square had been transformed. Stalls offering everything from apple cider to hand-crafted toys lined the perimeter, while tables laden with food occupied the center. A wooden platform had been erected at one end for dancing, where a small band was already tuning their instruments. Harriet wandered among the stalls, Benjamin secure in her arms, enjoying the festive atmosphere. Several townsfolk greeted her by name, a sign that she was becoming accepted in the community despite her unconventional situation. She was examining a display of hand-knitted baby blankets when a familiar voice spoke behind her. "That blue one would suit him," Noah said, causing her to turn quickly. He stood there in clean clothes, his hair still damp from washing, his hat held respectfully in his hands. He looked different outside the context of the boarding house, more at ease, somehow more himself. "It's beautiful," Harriet agreed, running her fingers over the soft wool. "But a luxury we can't afford just yet." Noah nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The festival is to your liking." "Very much," she replied, smiling as Benjamin reached toward Noah with eager hands. "And this one is absolutely fascinated by all the colors and sounds." Noah chuckled, offering his finger to the baby who grasped it with delight. "Smart boy, taking it all in." He looked back to Harriet, something hesitant in his expression. "Mrs. Perkins mentioned you might be attending. I was hoping you would." "It seemed a shame to miss it when it's right on our doorstep," Harriet replied, her heart beating a little faster under his steady gaze. "Indeed." Noah shifted slightly, clearing his throat. "They'll be starting the dancing soon. I wondered if you might favor me with one." Harriet hesitated, her conflicted feelings rising to the surface again. "I'm not sure that would be appropriate, Noah." "People talk and I let them talk," he interrupted gently. "One dance between friends is hardly scandalous." Friends. The word both reassured and disappointed her. "And Benjamin, I can't just leave him, Mrs. Perkins already offered to hold him for a spell," Noah replied, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Seems she's conspiring against your objections." Harriet couldn't help but laugh at that. She's a determined woman when she sets her mind to something. "As are you," Noah observed, his eyes warm with admiration. "One dance, Harriet, that's all I'm asking." Looking into his earnest face, Harriet found her resistance crumbling. "One dance," she agreed softly. They found Mrs. Perkins near the food tables, and the older woman took Benjamin with obvious delight, shooing them toward the dance platform where couples were already gathering. The band struck up a lively tune as Noah led Harriet to the edge of the dancing area. He held out his hand, and after only a moment's hesitation, she placed hers in it, allowing him to guide her into the circle of dancers. His hand at her waist was respectful, keeping a proper distance between them as they moved to the music. Harriet had always enjoyed dancing, and despite her initial reluctance, she found herself relaxing into the familiar steps. "You dance well," Noah commented as he guided her through a turn. "My father insisted on lessons," Harriet replied, memories of happier times surfacing. "Said no daughter of his would clump around a dance floor like a draft horse." Noah laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "Wise man, your father." "He was," Harriet agreed, a familiar pang of loss accompanying the memory. Her parents' deaths from influenza 3 years earlier had left her alone in the world, vulnerable to Thomas Lawson's charm and empty promises. As if sensing her shift in mood, Noah drew her slightly closer, his voice dropping so only she could hear. "You're thinking sad thoughts." This is a day for celebration." Harriet looked up into his face, struck anew by the kindness in his eyes. "I'm trying," she admitted. "Sometimes the past has a way of intruding on the present." "That it does," Noah agreed, his expression thoughtful. "But we get to choose whether we build our future on those foundations or despite them." The music ended before Harriet could respond, and couples around them applauded the band. Noah released her waist, but kept hold of her hand as they left the dance floor. "Thank you for the dance," he said, his thumb brushing lightly over her knuckles before he released her hand. "It was my pleasure," Harriet replied, and was surprised to realize she meant it. Dancing with Noah had felt right in a way that few things had since Benjamin's birth. They collected Benjamin from Mrs. Perkins and spent the remainder of the afternoon exploring the festival together. Noah bought them each a cup of hot cider and a slice of apple pie, insisting it was the best in the territory. "My mother's was better," he admitted as they sat on a bench near the edge of the square, "but this comes close." "You miss her," Harriet observed, noting the wistful look that crossed his face whenever he mentioned his mother. "Every day," Noah nodded. "She was a remarkable woman. Followed my father out here when there was nothing but wilderness and possibility. Built a life from scratch and never complained about the hardships." He glanced at Harriet. "She would have liked you." "Why do you say that?" Harriet asked, curious about the comparison. "Same kind of strength," Noah replied simply, "the quiet kind that endures." Harriet felt her cheeks warm at the unexpected compliment. "I'm not sure I'm as strong as you think." "Aren't you?" Noah challenged gently. "You've traveled alone with an infant, starting over in a strange town with nothing but determination and grit. If that's not strength, I don't know what is." Before Harriet could respond, Benjamin began to fuss, signaling the end of his patience with the day's excitement. She stood, adjusting him in her arms. "I should get him back. It's past his nap time." Noah nodded, rising to his feet. "I'll walk you." They made their way back to the boarding house in companionable silence, the sounds of the festival fading behind them. At the foot of the porch steps, Noah paused. "Thank you for today," he said, his voice low and sincere. "It meant a great deal to me." "To me as well," Harriet replied, surprised by how true the words felt. Noah reached out, his fingers lightly touching Benjamin's cheek. "Sweet dreams, little man," he murmured, then looked back to Harriet. "I'll see you at supper," she nodded, unable to trust her voice as emotions threatened to overwhelm her. As she watched Noah walk back toward the festival, Benjamin warm against her chest, Harriet acknowledged what her heart had been trying to tell her for weeks. She was falling in love with Noah Fletcher. The realization both exhilarated and terrified her. Once, she had given her heart freely, only to have it returned broken and battered. The cost had been not only her own pain, but a lifetime of consequences for her innocent son. Yet as she laid Benjamin down for his nap and watched his peaceful slumber, another truth emerged. Love was always a risk, but some risks were worth taking. Some men were worth trusting. The question that remained was whether she was brave enough to try again. The following week brought unexpected news that would test Harriet's newfound courage. A letter arrived for Noah, delivered by a rider from a neighboring town. Harriet was in the kitchen when Mrs. Perkins brought it to him at breakfast, and she couldn't help noticing how his expression tightened as he read its contents. He said nothing throughout the meal, but as the other boarders filed out, he remained at the table, the letter folded beside his plate. When only Harriet remained, clearing dishes, he finally spoke. "My sister's husband has passed away," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "Influenza took him last month." Harriet set down the stack of plates she was gathering. "Oh, Noah, I'm so sorry," he nodded, his jaw tight. "Rebecca's asking if I'll come to California." Help her manage things until she decides what to do next. He looked up at Harriet, conflict evident in his eyes. She has 3 young children and no other family there. Understanding washed over Harriet like a cold wave. "You have to go," she said softly, feeling as though the ground beneath her feet had suddenly shifted. "I do," Noah agreed, the admission clearly paining him. "She's my only family. I can't leave her to face this alone." Harriet forced herself to nod, to appear supportive even as disappointment flooded through her. This was how it always ended, wasn't it? Just as she began to hope, to trust, life intervened to remind her that nothing was certain, no one was permanent. "When will you leave?" she asked, proud of how steady her voice sounded. "Tomorrow, if I can arrange it," Noah replied, watching her carefully. "The letter took nearly 3 weeks to reach me. I've already delayed too long." "Of course." Harriet resumed gathering dishes, needing the movement to ground her. "Your sister needs you." Noah stood, moving around the table to stand before her. "Harriet," he said softly, causing her to look up at him, "this isn't what I want." "It doesn't matter what either of us wants," she replied, more sharply than she'd intended. "Family comes first." "I understand that better than most." "I know you do." Noah reached out as if to touch her face, then let his hand fall back to his side. "I just need you to know that this isn't, that I'm not." "You don't owe me explanations, Noah," Harriet interrupted, unable to bear his struggle for words. "We're friends, nothing more. You have responsibilities elsewhere. I understand perfectly." Something flickered in his eyes, hurt, perhaps, or frustration. "Is that what we are, just friends?" The question hung between them, loaded with all the things unsaid over the past weeks. Harriet could have seized the moment, could have told him how she felt, what she hoped, but fear, that old, faithful companion, held her tongue. "It's what we have to be," she said finally. "You're leaving, I'm staying. Anything else would be foolish." Noah studied her face for a long moment, then nodded, a resignation in his posture that made Harriet's heart ache. "I'll write," he said. "Let you know how things stand when I get there." "There's no need," Harriet replied, steeling herself against the pain. Better a clean break now than prolonged hope and inevitable disappointment. "Safe travels, Noah. I wish you and your sister well." She turned away before he could respond, busying herself with the dishes as he left the kitchen. Only when she was certain he was gone did she allow the tears to fall, silent witnesses to another goodbye she hadn't been prepared to make. Noah departed early the next morning. Harriet heard him moving about before dawn, the sound of his boots on the wooden floors as familiar to her now as her own heartbeat. She remained in her room, Benjamin sleeping peacefully beside her, unwilling to face another parting. When she finally emerged for her morning duties, Mrs. Perkins informed her that Noah had left a letter for her. Harriet took the sealed envelope with trembling hands, tucking it into her pocket without opening it. Whatever Noah had to say, she wasn't ready to hear it yet. The days that followed took on a gray quality, as though color had leached from the world along with Noah's presence. Harriet went about her duties mechanically, caring for Benjamin, cooking meals, cleaning rooms. She smiled when appropriate, spoke when necessary, but inside, a numbness had settled over her heart. It was nearly a week before she finally opened Noah's letter, sitting on her bed after Benjamin had fallen asleep. His handwriting was neat and precise, much like the man himself. "Dear Harriet," the letter began, "I've never been much good with words, especially when it matters most. By the time you read this, I'll be on my way to California, carrying regrets along with my provisions. Chief among those regrets is that I didn't tell you what was in my heart when I had the chance. Fear makes cowards of us all, I suppose, and I've been afraid of offering you something you might not want or need. But leaving without speaking feels like the greater cowardice, So here it is, plain and simple. I love you, Harriet Lawson. I love your strength, your dignity, your devotion to your son. I love the way you face each day with quiet determination, never asking for pity or special treatment despite the hardships you've endured. I love Benjamin, too, as if he were my own. Perhaps that's presumptuous of me, but it's true all the same. He deserves a father who will see his worth, guide his steps, and protect him from harm. I would count it the highest honor to be that man if you'd allow it. I don't know how long I'll need to stay in California. Rebecca's situation is complicated, and family obligations aren't easily discharged. But I do know that Tulsa is my home, and my ranch is waiting for the care only I can give it. I will return, Harriet, and when I do, I hope you might consider a future that includes me, not as a replacement for what you've lost, but as something new we might build together. Until then, know that you and Benjamin are in my thoughts every day. With deepest affection, Noah. Harriet read the letter twice more, tears blurring the words on the page. All the things she had been too afraid to say, too afraid to hope for, were here in Noah's steady hand. He loved her. He loved Benjamin, and he would return. But when? And what might change in the meantime? California was a world away, full of opportunities and beautiful women who didn't carry the burden of another man's child. Noah might intend to come back now, but intentions were easily altered by circumstance. Thomas had made promises, 2 vows before God and witnesses, that he had discarded like worn-out boots when they no longer suited him. How could she trust that Noah's words would hold their meaning across distance and time? Yet even as doubt whispered in her ear, another voice, stronger, clearer, reminded her of all the ways Noah had shown his character. Not through grand declarations or extravagant gestures, but through daily acts of steadfast kindness and respect. He had earned her trust 100 times over if only she had the courage to give it. Carefully folding the letter, Harriet placed it in the drawer beside her bed. She would write to him, she decided. Not today, perhaps not tomorrow, but soon. When she could find words that matched the complexity of her feelings. In the meantime, there was Benjamin to raise, work to do, and a life to build with or without Noah Fletcher's presence. September gave way to October, bringing cooler temperatures and the vibrant colors of autumn to the Oklahoma landscape. Harriet found a rhythm to her days that, if not happy, was at least sustainable. Mrs. Perkins had raised her wages slightly, acknowledging her increasing value to the boarding house, and Benjamin was thriving, growing stronger and more curious by the day. It was mid-October when the first letter from Noah arrived, postmarked from Sacramento. Harriet recognized his handwriting immediately and carried the envelope to her room to read in private. Inside, Noah detailed his journey west and his arrival at his sister's small farm outside Sacramento. Rebecca was struggling, he wrote, not only with grief but with the practical challenges of managing alone with 3 children under 10. He had immediately set to work repairing fences, tending livestock, and helping bring in the harvest before winter set in. Rebecca speaks of selling the farm, he wrote. She has no heart for it without James, and the children are too young to be of much help. But such decisions can't be rushed, especially when grief clouds judgment. For now, I'm doing what I can to keep things running while she considers her options. The letter continued with questions about Harriet and Benjamin. Was the baby crawling yet? Had the tooth that was troubling him finally emerged? Was Mrs. Perkins still serving that terrible coffee that tasted like boiled leather? Harriet smiled at his observations, hearing Noah's voice in each carefully penned word. He concluded with a simple but heartfelt statement. I miss you both more than I can say. The distance has only confirmed what I already knew. My heart remains in Tulsa, even as my hands work California soil." She wrote back that same evening, sharing news of Benjamin's developments. He was indeed crawling now, getting into everything within reach and updates from the boarding house. Mrs. Perkins had taken on 2 new boarders, both railroad men who would stay through the winter. The general store had expanded its inventory in anticipation of Christmas, and the town was talking of building a proper schoolhouse come spring. What Harriet didn't write was how empty the boarding house felt without Noah's presence, how she found herself listening for his footsteps each evening, how Benjamin still looked toward the door at mealtimes, as if expecting the man who had so gently held him and spoken to him, as though he understood every babble and coo. Instead, she closed with careful words that revealed just enough of her heart to keep the connection between them alive. "Your absence is felt keenly here, not only by Benjamin, who still reaches for anyone wearing a hat, but by me as well. I find myself looking forward to your return, whenever that may be." Their correspondence continued through November and into December, letters crossing the vast distance between Oklahoma and California every few weeks. In each exchange, Harriet felt herself growing bolder, more willing to share not only the events of her days but the thoughts and feelings that accompanied them. Noah's letters, too, became more personal. He wrote of his hopes for the future, of improvements he planned for his ranch when he returned, of how he pictured Harriet and Benjamin there with him, if they chose to accept his invitation. "It's a modest place," he admitted, "but solidly built, with room to grow. The land is good, fertile bottom soil along the creek, plenty of grazing for cattle and timber enough for building and fuel. A family could be happy there, I think. A family." The word settled in Harriet's heart, both frightening and alluring. Since Benjamin's birth, she had resigned herself to building a different kind of family, just the 2 of them against the world. The possibility of more, of a complete circle that included a husband and father, seemed almost too much to hope for. Yet hope she did, especially as Christmas approached and the boarding house filled with festive preparations. Mrs. Perkins insisted on a proper celebration, complete with a tree in the parlor and small gifts for all the residents. The older woman had taken a particular shine to Benjamin, who was now pulling himself up on furniture and taking tentative steps while holding onto hands or chair legs. "That boy will be running before spring," Mrs. Perkins predicted as she watched Benjamin navigate along the edge of the sofa. "Mark my words." Harriet smiled, catching her son as he lost his balance and tumbled toward her. "Not if I have anything to say about it. He's growing up too fast as it is." Mrs. Perkins gave her a knowing look. "Children do that. One minute they're babes in arms, the next they're heading off to start their own families." She paused, folding the dish towel in her hands with deliberate care. "Any word from Mr. Fletcher lately?" Harriet felt her cheeks warm. She hadn't shared the contents of Noah's letters with anyone, but Mrs. Perkins was observant enough to note how carefully Harriet watched for the mail, and how her mood lifted whenever an envelope bearing Noah's handwriting arrived. "His sisters decided to sell the farm," Harriet replied, focusing on the practical aspects of Noah's latest letter. "They're waiting until after Christmas to list it, but she's made up her mind to move back east, closer to her husband's family." "And Noah, will he stay on in California?" The question was casual, but Harriet knew the older woman was genuinely concerned. "No," Harriet replied, unable to keep the relief from her voice. "He'll help with the sale and see Rebecca settled, then return to his own place." She hesitated, then added, "He hopes to be back by early spring." Mrs. Perkins nodded, satisfaction evident in her expression. "Good. That man belongs here, not gallivanting around California." She gave Harriet a direct look. "And he belongs with you and that boy if you've sense enough to see it." Harriet picked up Benjamin, using the moment to compose herself. "It's not that simple, Mrs. Perkins, isn't it?" the older woman challenged gently. "Seems to me the only complicated part is your determination to make it so." Before Harriet could respond, one of the boarders called for Mrs. Perkins, ending the conversation. But her words lingered in Harriet's mind throughout the day and into the evening as she prepared Benjamin for bed. Was it really that simple? Could she just choose happiness? Choose to trust Noah, to believe that his feelings were genuine and enduring? Choose to build a future on hope rather than fear? As Christmas Eve approached, Harriet found herself at a crossroads. The latest letter from Noah had included a small package, a carved wooden horse for Benjamin, and a delicate silver hairpin for Harriet, simple gifts that nonetheless represented significant expense for a man supporting his sister's family while maintaining his own property from afar. "I wish I could give you both more," Noah had written, "but please accept these tokens as evidence of my constant thoughts of you. The wooden horse is part of a set I'm carving the rest for when I return. Every boy should have something that's entirely his own, something to treasure and perhaps pass on to his own son someday. The hairpin was my mother's. It's one of the few things of hers I kept after she passed. I'd be honored if you would wear it, Harriet. It seems right that it should belong to a woman of similar strength and grace." The gifts and the sentiments behind them had moved Harriet deeply. She had wept quietly in her room, holding the delicate silver pin and imagining the care with which Noah had packed it for its journey to her. She had watched Benjamin's delight as he clutched the wooden horse, already understanding that it was his to keep, and she had made a decision. Christmas Eve brought a light dusting of snow to Tulsa, just enough to transform the dusty streets into a winter wonderland that delighted the children and lifted the spirits of even the most cynical adults. The boarding house glowed with warmth and light as Mrs. Perkins hosted her annual Christmas Eve supper, inviting several neighbors to join the boarders for a festive meal. Harriet had spent the day cooking alongside Mrs. Perkins, preparing roast beef, potatoes, and all the trimmings. Benjamin had been passed from lap to lap as various boarders entertained him, allowing Harriet to focus on the meal. By the time the guests began to arrive, the entire house smelled of good food and pine boughs. Dinner was a boisterous affair, with stories and laughter flowing as freely as Mrs. Perkins' special holiday punch. Benjamin, dressed in his best clothes, charmed everyone with his attempts to participate in the conversation, babbling excitedly from his makeshift high chair. As the meal concluded and people moved to the parlor for coffee and dessert, Harriet excused herself to put Benjamin to bed. The excitement had finally caught up with him, and he was rubbing his eyes and fussing in a way that signaled imminent meltdown. "I'll be back down to help with the dishes," she promised Mrs. Perkins, who waved her off with a smile. "Take your time, dear. Everything's well in hand." Upstairs, Harriet changed Benjamin into his nightclothes and settled into the rocking chair beside the window to nurse him to sleep. As she rocked, she gazed out at the snow-covered street below, watching as late arrivals hurried toward homes where warmth and family awaited. A lone figure on horseback caught her attention, a tall man dismounting in front of the boarding house, his hat pulled low against the cold. Something about his movements, the way he paused to check his horse before approaching the porch, sent Harriet's heart racing. It couldn't be. Noah was in California, hundreds of miles away. Yet as the man looked up, the light from the boarding house windows illuminating his face, Harriet felt the world tilt beneath her. It was him. Noah Fletcher had returned to Tulsa on Christmas Eve. Benjamin, sensing her sudden tension, pulled away from her breast, fussing. Harriet quickly adjusted her clothing and stood, moving to the crib to settle her son. Her hands trembled as she tucked the blanket around him, her mind racing with questions. Why hadn't Noah written that he was coming? How had he managed to travel so quickly? What did his unexpected appearance mean? She heard the front door open below, followed by exclamations of surprise and welcome. Mrs. Perkins' voice carried up the stairs, expressing delight at the unexpected guest. Then Noah's deeper tones, too low to make out the words but unmistakably his. Harriet checked her appearance in the small mirror above the washstand. Her hair was neat, secured with the silver pin Noah had sent her. Her dress, while not her finest, was clean and presentable. She pinched her cheeks to bring color to them, then took a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever awaited her downstairs. As she descended the staircase, the conversations in the parlor hushed. Noah stood near the Christmas tree, his hat in his hands, his gaze immediately finding hers. He looked tired but alert, his face leaner than she remembered, his eyes bright with an emotion she dared not name. "Harriet," he said, her name a caress on his lips. "Noah," she replied, pausing on the bottom step. "This is a surprise." He nodded, taking a half step toward her before seeming to remember they had an audience. "I apologize for arriving unannounced. The stage was faster than I expected, and He hesitated, his eyes never leaving hers. "I couldn't wait another day." Mrs. Perkins, ever practical, clapped her hands to draw attention. "Mr. Fletcher must be frozen to the bone and hungry as a bear after his journey. Let's get him settled with a plate and some hot coffee." The gathering shifted focus, allowing Harriet to approach Noah without everyone's eyes upon them. As she drew near, she noticed the fatigue etched in the lines around his eyes, the stubble on his jaw that spoke of days of travel. "You look exhausted," she said softly. "How long have you been on the road?" "5 days," Noah replied, his voice equally low. "Barely stopped except to change horses or catch a few hours' sleep when necessary." "But why? Your letter said you wouldn't be back until spring." Noah's gaze intensified. "I realized some things can't wait for convenient timing." He glanced around at the crowded parlor. "Is there somewhere we might speak privately?" "Just for a moment," Harriet nodded, gesturing toward the kitchen. "It's quieter in there." They slipped away from the gathering, finding the kitchen empty as everyone was now enjoying dessert in the parlor. Noah set his hat on the table and turned to face Harriet, the distance between them suddenly charged with unspoken words. "I've missed you," he said simply. "More than I thought possible." Harriet felt her carefully constructed defenses beginning to crumble. "We've missed you too," she admitted. "Benjamin still looks for you at mealtimes." A smile softened Noah's weary features. "How is he? Walking yet?" "Almost. He cruises along the furniture and takes a few steps if someone holds his hands." Harriet couldn't help smiling at Noah's genuine interest in her son's development. "He still sleeps with that wooden horse you sent. I'm glad." Noah took a deep breath as if gathering courage. "Harriet, I need to explain why I've come back so suddenly." "Your sister, is she all right?" Concern immediately filled Harriet. "She's fine," Noah assured her. "Better than fine, actually. Her husband's brother came to visit just after Thanksgiving. He's a widower with 2 children of his own." A smile tugged at the corner of Noah's mouth. "By Christmas, it was clear that Rebecca didn't need me anymore. Daniel is a good man, and they've already decided to marry in the spring. He'll take over the farm, and the children will have a father again." "That's wonderful for her," Harriet said, genuinely happy for Noah's sister but still confused. "But why the urgent journey back? Surely it could have waited for better weather." Noah stepped closer, close enough that Harriet could feel the warmth radiating from him, smell the familiar scent of leather and wood smoke that clung to his clothes. "Because every day away from you and Benjamin felt like a month," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Because I realize that life is too short and too unpredictable to waste a single moment when you know where you belong." He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "And I belong with you, Harriet, if you'll have me." Harriet's breath caught in her throat. This was the moment she had both longed for and feared, the moment when pretense fell away and truth stood naked between them. "Noah," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "there are things about me, about Benjamin's father, that you should know before." "I don't need to know," Noah interrupted gently. "Not unless you want to tell me someday. What matters is who you are now, who we could be together." "But you deserve the whole truth," Harriet insisted, needing him to understand the magnitude of what he was offering. "Benjamin's father didn't just leave. The sound of the front door opening and a blast of cold air interrupted her confession. Voices rose in the parlor, expressing surprise and concern. Mrs. Perkins appeared in the kitchen doorway, her expression troubled. "Harriet, there's someone asking for you," she said, her tone cautious. "A man says his name is Thomas Lawson." The world seemed to stop spinning for a moment as Harriet absorbed this impossible information. Thomas was here, in Tulsa. After more than a year of silence, Noah's hand tightened around hers, an unconscious gesture of support or perhaps possession. She looked up to find his expression carefully neutral, though she could see the questions in his eyes. "You want to see him?" Noah asked quietly, already stepping back to give her space to decide. Harriet's mind raced. Part of her wanted to refuse, to pretend Thomas didn't exist, hadn't suddenly reappeared to disrupt the life she had so carefully rebuilt. But another part, the part that had once loved him, the part that had mourned not only his betrayal but the future they should have had, needed closure. "Yes," she said finally, "but not alone." Noah nodded, understanding without words. "I'll be right beside you." Together they returned to the parlor, where the festive atmosphere had dissipated with the arrival of the unexpected visitor. Thomas Lawson stood near the door, brushing snow from his expensive coat, his handsome face arranged in an expression of apologetic charm that Harriet had once found irresistible. He looked up as they entered, his practiced smile faltering slightly as he took in Noah's protective stance beside Harriet. "Harry," Thomas said, using the nickname she had always disliked, "you're a difficult woman to find." "That was rather the point," Harriet replied, surprised by the steadiness of her voice. "What are you doing here, Thomas?" He had the grace to look abashed, though Harriet knew from experience that shame was not an emotion Thomas felt deeply or for long. "I've come to make amends," he said, his tone suggesting he expected gratitude for this magnanimous gesture. "To set things right between us." "There is no us," Harriet stated firmly. "There hasn't been since the day you walked out." Thomas's expression hardened slightly. "I made a mistake," he admitted, though the words seemed to cost him. "I was young, scared of the responsibility. I've grown up since then." "As have I," Harriet replied, "but you're still arriving a year and a half too late." Thomas glanced at Noah, assessing the competition. "I see you've moved on quickly enough." A ripple of outrage moved through the room at the implication. Mrs. Perkins stepped forward, her usually kind face stern with disapproval. "Mr. Lawson, I think you'd better watch your tone in my house." Thomas ignored her, focusing solely on Harriet. "Where's my son? I have a right to see him." "Your son?" Harriet's voice rose slightly, anger finally breaking through her composed exterior. "The child you abandoned before he was even born. The child whose name you've never asked, whose face you've never seen." "I'm his father," Thomas insisted, a petulant note entering his voice. "The law recognizes my rights." Noah, who had remained silent beside Harriet, finally spoke. "The law also recognizes abandonment," he said, his tone deceptively calm, "and the obligations of a father to provide for his child." Thomas straightened, bristling at the challenge. "And who exactly are you?" "Noah Fletcher," he replied simply. "A friend of the family." "Well, Mr. Fletcher, this is between me and my wife," Thomas said dismissively. "So if you don't mind, ex-wife," Harriet interrupted. "The divorce was finalized 6 months ago. Your repeated absence and failure to respond to legal notices was taken as consent." This was the first time she had publicly acknowledged her divorced status, a fact she had kept private to avoid the stigma it might bring to Benjamin. Thomas looked genuinely shocked. "Divorce? But that's you can't have." "I did," Harriet said firmly, "and it was granted on grounds of abandonment and failure to provide." She took a step closer to him, finding strength in the truth she had kept hidden for so long. "You left us with nothing, Thomas. No money, no home, not even an explanation. Just a note saying you weren't ready to be a father." Her voice broke slightly. "Do you have any idea what that did to me? What it will someday mean to your son?" The room had gone completely silent, the holiday celebration forgotten as the drama unfolded. Thomas had the decency to look uncomfortable under the collective judgment of the gathered witnesses. "I was wrong," he admitted, his charm failing him in the face of Harriet's raw honesty. "I came to make it right. I have money now, connections. I can provide for you both." "We don't need your money," Harriet replied, a new certainty filling her. "Benjamin and I are managing just fine without you." "Benjamin," Thomas repeated, the name clearly unfamiliar to him. "You named him Benjamin, after my father," Harriet confirmed, "a man who understood what it meant to be responsible for those who depend on you." Thomas's expression hardened. "I want to see my son," he demanded. "I have rights." "Rights you forfeited when you walked away," Harriet countered, her resolve strengthening with each exchange. "You don't even know him, Thomas. You don't know that he has your eyes but my father's chin. You don't know that he's trying to walk already, or that he loves the sound of rain on the roof, or that he's terrified of thunder." She took a shaky breath, years of pent-up hurt and anger finally finding release. "The father of my child abandoned us both," she said, the words directed not just at Thomas but at everyone present, a public declaration of a private pain she had carried too long. "Left us alone when we needed him most." Noah stepped forward then, placing a supportive hand at the small of Harriet's back. "Then he's a bigger fool than any man I've ever known," he said quietly, his gaze fixed on Thomas with a mixture of pity and contempt. Thomas flinched as if struck. For a brief moment, something like genuine regret crossed his features. Then his habitual mask of charming confidence reasserted itself. "I can see I've come at a bad time," he said, reaching for his hat. "Perhaps we can discuss this more privately tomorrow, Harry." "There's nothing to discuss," Harriet replied firmly. "I wish you well, Thomas, but Benjamin and I have built a life without you. We don't need you disrupting it now." "You can't keep my son from me," Thomas protested, a note of desperation entering his voice. "I'm his father." "No," Harriet said softly. "You're the man who sired him. There's a difference." She turned to Noah, drawing strength from his steady presence. "Would you check on Benjamin for me? Make sure our voices haven't disturbed him." Noah searched her face, clearly wanting to ensure she was truly all right facing Thomas alone. Whatever he saw there must have reassured him, for he nodded. "Of course. I'll be right upstairs if you need me." As Noah left the room, Harriet turned back to Thomas. "Say what you came to say, then go. These people have a holiday to celebrate, and you've intruded long enough." Thomas glanced around at the unfriendly faces surrounding him and apparently decided a strategic retreat was in order. "I'll be staying at the hotel in town for a few days," he said, his tone suggesting he was doing her a great favor. "In case you reconsider, or want Benjamin to meet his real father." "Goodbye, Thomas," Harriet said firmly, showing him to the door. He paused on the threshold, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "You've changed, Harry." "Yes," she agreed. "I have." After Thomas departed, the boarding house remained awkwardly silent for a moment, the festive mood thoroughly disrupted. Then Mrs. Perkins stepped forward, clapping her hands briskly. "Well, that was more excitement than we bargained for on Christmas Eve," she announced. "But it's still a night for celebration. Mr. Peterson, why don't you play us something cheerful on the piano, and someone fetch the eggnog from the kitchen?" As the gathering reluctantly returned to its holiday pursuits, Harriet slipped upstairs to check on Benjamin and to find Noah. She needed a moment to collect herself after the confrontation, to process the emotions Thomas's unexpected appearance had stirred up. She found Noah standing beside Benjamin's crib, watching the sleeping child with an expression of such tenderness that it made her heart constrict. He looked up as she entered, concern evident in his eyes. "Is he gone?" he asked quietly. Harriet nodded, crossing to stand beside him. "For now. He says he'll be in town for a few days." "And how are you?" The simple question, asked with genuine care, broke through the last of Harriet's defenses. Tears she had been holding back spilled down her cheeks as the events of the evening caught up with her. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I thought I was past it all, the hurt, the anger, but seeing him again—" She shook her head, unable to articulate the complex emotions swirling within her. Noah hesitated only a moment before opening his arms to her. Harriet stepped into his embrace, allowing herself the comfort of being held as she cried silently against his chest. His hand moved soothingly up and down her back, his heart beat strong and steady beneath her ear. "You were magnificent," he murmured against her hair. "Standing up to him like that. Speaking your truth." Harriet pulled back slightly to look up at him. "You're not bothered by what you learned about the divorce, about Thomas?" Noah's expression softened. "Why would I be? You survived something that would have broken many women. You protected your son and built a new life from nothing. If anything, I admire you more now than I did an hour ago." Fresh tears welled in Harriet's eyes at his words. "I wanted to tell you myself," she said. "Before he appeared, that's what I was trying to say in the kitchen." "I know," Noah assured her, brushing a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "And I meant what I said. Your past is your own, Harriet. You can share as much or as little as you choose." Harriet took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I want you to know everything," she decided. "No more secrets between us." Noah nodded, leading her to the small sofa beneath the window. They sat close together, their knees touching as Harriet gathered her thoughts. "I met Thomas in Kansas City," she began. "After my parents died, I was alone, managing their hotel as best I could. He was charming, handsome, full of grand plans for the future." She smiled sadly at the memory of her younger self, so easily dazzled. "We married quickly, too quickly. By the time I realized he was more interested in my inheritance than in me, most of the money was gone." Noah's hand covered hers, a silent gesture of support. "When I told him I was expecting Benjamin, he seemed happy at first, made all kinds of promises about being a better husband, a good father." Harriet swallowed hard, the pain of what came next still sharp despite the passage of time. Then one morning he was gone. Left a note saying he wasn't ready for fatherhood, that he needed to find himself before he could be responsible for a child. "Coward," Noah muttered, his hand tightening around hers. "I had no way to contact him, no idea where he'd gone. The hotel was failing without my parents' connections to keep it afloat. There were debts I didn't even know about." Harriet sighed, remembering those desperate days. "I sold what I could, paid what debts I could manage, and filed for divorce on grounds of abandonment. When Benjamin was born, I named him after my father and gave him my family name, Lawson. Thomas hadn't earned the right to have his son carry his name. "And tonight was the first time you've seen him since he left?" Noah asked gently. Harriet nodded. "I never expected to see him again." "Certainly not here, not now." She looked up at Noah, a new worry creasing her brow. "What if he tries to take Benjamin? Legally, he might have rights, even after abandoning us." "He won't get near either of you," Noah promised, his voice low and firm. "Not unless you want him to." He hesitated, then added, "But you should consider whether Benjamin might someday want to know his birth father. That's a decision only you can make, Harriet, and whatever you choose, I'll support you." The generosity of this statement, putting Benjamin's potential future needs above his own feelings, touched Harriet deeply. This was what real love looked like. Not the flashy, self-centered affection Thomas had offered, but a steady commitment to what was best for those you cared about, even when it was difficult. "Thank you," she whispered, leaning her head against Noah's shoulder. "For understanding, for being here." "There's nowhere else I'd rather be," he replied simply. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching Benjamin sleep peacefully, unaware of the drama that had unfolded or the decisions being made that would shape his future. After a while, Noah spoke again, his voice soft but resolute. "I meant to do this differently," he said. "Had it all planned out, was going to take you for a drive tomorrow, find somewhere private, make it special." He shifted to face her more directly. "But after tonight, I don't want to waste another moment being anything less than completely honest with you." Harriet's heart began to race as Noah took both her hands in his. "I love you, Harriet Lawson," he said, his blue eyes never leaving hers. "I love your strength, your kindness, your determination to build a good life for your son no matter the cost to yourself. I love the way you stand up for what's right, even when it's hard." He smiled softly. "I even love how you burn the biscuits every other Tuesday because you're trying to do too many things at once." Harriet laughed despite the tears gathering in her eyes. "Those biscuits are a tragedy," she agreed. "I love Benjamin too," Noah continued, his expression growing more serious. "Not because he's a part of you, though that would be reason enough, but because he's himself bright and curious and determined. He deserves a father who will cherish him, guide him, protect him with his last breath if necessary." He squeezed her hands gently. "I want to be that father, Harriet. I want us to be a family, you, me, and Benjamin, and maybe someday others." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold band. "This was my mother's," he explained. "My father gave it to her when they decided to make a life together in this wild country. It's not fancy, but it represents a promise that was kept for 30 years, through good times and bad." Noah held the ring between them, a question and an offering in one. "I'm asking you to marry me, Harriet, not because you need my protection or Benjamin needs my name, but because I believe we could build something beautiful together, something that would make all three of us happy." Harriet looked at the simple gold band, then at the earnest face of the man offering it to her. In that moment, all her doubts and fears seemed to fall away, leaving only the certainty that this was right. This was what second chances looked like, not the false promise Thomas had arrived with tonight, but the genuine commitment Noah had demonstrated through months of steady, respectful love. "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly, "Yes, I will marry you, Noah Fletcher." Joy blazed across Noah's face as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her hand. He cradled her face gently, his thumbs brushing away the tears of happiness that spilled down her cheeks. "May I kiss you now, Harriet Lawson?" he asked, his voice husky with emotion. "I thought you'd never ask," she replied with a watery smile. Their first kiss was everything Harriet had secretly hoped for, tender yet passionate, a promise of the love they would share for a lifetime. When they finally parted, Noah rested his forehead against hers, his breathing uneven. "Merry Christmas," he murmured. "The best Christmas," Harriet agreed, nestling against his chest as they both turned to watch Benjamin, sleeping peacefully in his crib, unaware that his world had just changed forever for the better. The following morning, Christmas Day dawned clear and bright, the world outside transformed by the light dusting of snow that had fallen overnight. Harriet woke early, Benjamin's cheerful babbling drawing her from sleep. For a moment, she wondered if the events of the previous evening had been a dream. Thomas's unexpected appearance, Noah's heartfelt proposal, her acceptance. Then she felt the weight of the gold band on her finger and knew it had all been real. She was engaged to be married to a good man who loved not only her but her son as well. Benjamin greeted her with a toothless grin as she lifted him from his crib. "Ma, ma, ma," he babbled, his favorite new sound. "Merry Christmas, my sweet boy," Harriet murmured, kissing his chubby cheek. "We have much to celebrate today." She dressed Benjamin in his best clothes and herself in her Sunday dress, taking extra care with her hair, which she arranged simply but elegantly, secured with Noah's silver hairpin. The boarding house was quiet as they descended the stairs, most residents still abed after the previous night's festivities. In the kitchen, however, Harriet found Noah and Mrs. Perkins already at work, preparing breakfast. Noah looked up as she entered, his face lighting with a smile that warmed her to her toes. "Merry Christmas," he greeted, crossing to kiss her cheek and ruffle Benjamin's hair. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in months," Harriet admitted, transferring Benjamin to Noah's waiting arms. The baby went willingly, reaching for Noah's face with delighted recognition. Mrs. Perkins watched them with undisguised satisfaction. "I see congratulations are in order," she noted, gesturing to the ring on Harriet's finger. Harriet blushed but nodded, unable to contain her happiness. "Noah proposed last night." "About time," the older woman declared, wiping her hands on her apron. "I was beginning to think I'd need to lock you two in the pantry together to get any results." Noah laughed, bouncing Benjamin gently. "Your matchmaking skills remain unneeded but appreciated, Mrs. Perkins." The morning passed in a pleasant blur of Christmas breakfast, gift-giving, and the gradual awakening of the boarding house to a new day. Several of the boarders offered congratulations when they noticed Harriet's ring, and if anyone thought the engagement hasty after Noah's long absence, they were kind enough not to say so. It was mid-morning when a knock at the door interrupted the festivities. Mrs. Perkins answered it, returning to the parlor with a troubled expression. "It's Mr. Lawson again," she informed Harriet quietly. "Says he won't leave until he's seen his son." Noah, who had been showing Benjamin a wooden toy train one of the boarders had given him, looked up at Harriet, his expression calm but resolute. "What do you want to do?" Harriet considered her options. She could refuse to see Thomas, have him turned away. She could insist on meeting him alone, protecting Noah and Benjamin from any potential unpleasantness. But neither approach felt right. "We'll see him together," she decided, meeting Noah's gaze. "All three of us. He should understand from the beginning what he's dealing with." Noah nodded, standing with Benjamin in his arms. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you." Mrs. Perkins showed Thomas into the small sitting room off the main parlor, providing a measure of privacy for the uncomfortable reunion. He stood as they entered, his expression darkening when he saw Benjamin in Noah's arms. "I came to see my son," he said without preamble, "not to watch another man hold him." "This is Benjamin," Harriet said, ignoring his tone. "Benjamin, this is Mr. Lawson." The formal introduction was deliberate, a clear signal that Thomas had not earned the right to be called father yet. Thomas seemed to understand the message, his expression tightening briefly before he composed himself. "He's grown," he observed inanely, as if he had any frame of reference for the statement. "Children do that," Noah replied mildly, shifting Benjamin to a more comfortable position. The baby regarded Thomas with curious eyes, showing none of the recognition or affection he displayed with Noah. An awkward silence fell, broken only when Benjamin began to squirm in Noah's arms, reaching toward a toy on the nearby table. Noah set him down carefully, keeping a supportive hand on his back as the child took a tentative step, then another, before dropping to his hands and knees to crawl the rest of the way. "He's walking?" Thomas asked, genuine surprise in his voice. "Just beginning to," Harriet confirmed. "He'll be running before spring." Thomas watched his son for a moment, an unreadable expression crossing his face. "He looks like my father," he said finally. "Same eyes." "Yes," Harriet agreed, having noticed the resemblance herself. "He has your eyes." Another silence fell, heavier this time with the weight of all that had been lost and could never be recovered. Finally, Thomas straightened his shoulders, adopting the confident posture Harriet remembered so well. "I've been thinking about what you said last night," he began. "About me abandoning you both. You're right, of course. It was unforgivable." He glanced at Benjamin, who was happily gnawing on the wooden toy. "I can't change the past, but I could provide for his future, financial support at least." Harriet exchanged a glance with Noah before responding. "That's unexpected, Thomas. Thank you for the offer." "It's the least I can do," Thomas replied, a hint of his old charm returning. "I've done well for myself in Denver. Real estate investments, mostly. I can afford to be generous." Noah's expression remained neutral, but Harriet felt him tense slightly beside her. "What exactly are you proposing?" he asked. Thomas reached into his coat and withdrew an envelope. "A trust fund for the boy," he explained, holding it out to Harriet. "To be administered by the bank until he's of age. For education, perhaps, or to start a business when he's older." Harriet took the envelope cautiously. "And what would you expect in return?" A flicker of the old Thomas calculating, self-serving crossed his face before he masked it with sincerity. "Just the opportunity to know my son," he said. "Occasional visits, perhaps letters with news of his development. I've missed so much already." Harriet considered the proposal, weighing Thomas's words against what she knew of his character. He had always been generous when it suited him, when there was something to be gained. What was he hoping to gain now? "Benjamin deserves to know where he comes from," she said carefully. "Who his birth father is. But any relationship between you would have to develop slowly, on Benjamin's terms, not yours." Thomas nodded, seemingly relieved by her response. "Of course, I understand completely." "And you should know," Harriet continued, glancing at Noah, who gave her an encouraging nod, "that Noah and I are to be married. Benjamin will have a father in his daily life, a father who has chosen him, who will raise him, guide him, love him as his own." She had expected anger, perhaps jealousy. Instead, Thomas's expression reflected something closer to relief. "I'm glad," he said, and for once Harriet believed he was being sincere. "The boy deserves that. You both do." He turned to Noah, extending his hand. "Take care of them," he said, a note of genuine emotion in his voice. "Do better than I did." Noah clasped Thomas's hand briefly. "I intend to," he replied, no challenge in his tone, just a simple statement of fact. Thomas nodded, then knelt beside Benjamin, who regarded him with curious eyes. "Goodbye, little man," he said softly. "I'll see you again someday when you're older. Your mother will explain who I am when the time is right." He brushed a gentle hand over the child's head, then stood. "He has your chin," he told Harriet, a ghost of their old intimacy in the observation. "My father's chin," she corrected gently. But your eyes, I'll make sure he knows that. Thomas nodded, accepting this compromise. I'll be in touch about the trust fund, he said, retrieving his hat from the side table. And I'll send my new address for when, if you decide letters would be appropriate. Thank you, Thomas, Harriet said, and meant it. Not for the money, which she knew Noah would insist they invest for Benjamin's future rather than use for daily needs, but for this unexpected moment of grace, a man acknowledging his failures and trying in his limited way to make amends. After Thomas departed, Harriet leaned against Noah's solid strength, emotionally drained but oddly at peace. That went better than I expected, she admitted. Noah wrapped an arm around her shoulders. He's not all bad, he observed. Just weak in ways that matter most. Harriet nodded, watching as Benjamin continued playing, unaware of the significance of what had just transpired. Do you think I did the right thing, allowing him some connection to Benjamin's future? I think you did the only thing a mother with your heart could do, Noah replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. You put Benjamin's needs above your own feelings. That's what makes you extraordinary, Harriet Lawson. She looked up at him, this man who had entered their lives so unexpectedly and changed them so completely. I love you, she said, the words coming easily now that she had allowed herself to acknowledge the truth. I think I have since that first day at the general store, when you told me about Mrs. Perkins needing help. Noah's smile was like sunrise breaking over the plains. I knew the moment I saw you standing there, baby in your arms, chin up despite everything you'd been through, he confessed. Took me longer to admit it to myself, though. Benjamin chose that moment to pull himself up on Noah's pant leg, demanding attention with an imperious bah. That made them both laugh. Yes, young sir, Noah responded, lifting the child into his arms. What can we do for you on this fine Christmas morning? Harriet watched them together, her heart full to bursting with love for both of them. Whatever challenges the future held and life in the Oklahoma Territory promised many they would face them together, as a family. 3 months later, on a perfect spring day with wildflowers carpeting the prairie around them, Harriet Lawson became Harriet Fletcher in a simple ceremony outside Noah's newly renovated farmhouse. Benjamin, now steady on his feet, toddled down the makeshift aisle carrying a small pillow with their rings, though Mrs. Perkins walked close behind to ensure they reached their destination. The house, which Noah had spent weeks preparing for their arrival, was everything he had promised, solidly built, with room to grow, situated on fertile land with a creek running along one boundary. It wasn't grand or imposing, but it was home from the moment Harriet crossed the threshold, Benjamin in her arms and Noah at her side. That night, after Benjamin had been tucked into his new room with his wooden horse and the rest of the set Noah had carved for him, husband and wife stood on the porch of their home, watching as stars appeared in the darkening sky. Happy? Noah asked, his arms encircling Harriet from behind. Completely, she replied, leaning back against his chest. This is more than I ever dared hope for after everything. You deserve every happiness, Noah murmured against her hair. You and Benjamin both. Harriet turned in his arms to face him. We have it, she assured him. Right here, with you. As they sealed their new beginning with a kiss, Harriet reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the depths of abandonment and despair to the heights of love and new promise, she had learned that sometimes the end of one dream made space for another, better one to take root. Benjamin's father had indeed abandoned them both. But in doing so, he had unknowingly set them on a path that led to Noah Fletcher, a man wise enough to recognize what Thomas had foolishly discarded, brave enough to claim it as his own, and loving enough to cherish it for a lifetime. The following spring brought not only abundant crops and a thriving herd of cattle to the Fletcher ranch, but also a new addition to the family, a daughter they named Sarah, after Noah's mother. Benjamin, now nearly 3 years old, approached his role as big brother with solemn responsibility, helping his mother with the baby in ways that often created more work but always brought smiles. Thomas kept his word about the trust fund, and occasional letters arrived with news of his life in Denver. Harriet saved these for when Benjamin was older, along with the photograph of his birth father that she had once hidden away. Noah supported her decision without reservation, understanding that a child deserved to know their history, even the painful parts. As for Harriet and Noah, their love deepened with each passing season, weathering the inevitable storms of life on the frontier with the same steady strength that had brought them together. They would go on to have 2 more children, twin boys, who arrived in the winter of 1883, bringing noise and energy to match the wildest Oklahoma thunderstorm. But no matter how their family grew or how much the territory around them developed, they never forgot those early days, a woman alone with her child, a cowboy with a gentle heart, and the simple, life-changing truth he had spoken on that fateful day. Then he's a bigger fool. Words that had begun their story, and words they would recount to their grandchildren many years later, as they sat on the same porch where they had once watched the stars and dreamed of their future together.